Well, isn't this fun? I get to do a podcast with Ann Porter, who happens to be a listener of Beyond Belief Sobriety and has been for several years. She wrote me and said that although she's been listening to the podcast, she was not compelled to write or contact me until she listened to an episode that I did with Ibby A. And that was episode 208. And Ibby and I were talking about our discomfort with sponsoring people, and taking them through the steps and so forth. And Anne said that while she can understand our hesitancy, she thinks it's important that we push through that because there's a lot that secular people have to offer in AA to make it more inclusive and welcoming for everybody, is how I understood your letter there, Anne. So I thought, well, this is an interesting conversation, and I would love to have you on to talk about it. So welcome, Anne, to Beyond Belief Sobriety. It's so nice to have you.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. I'd hate to say after listening to your conversation with John, I was even more impelled to talk.
Oh, really? Which one was that?
The most recent one you had, I think it was like episode 250 or something.
Uh-huh. What did he have? Go ahead.
Well, it was the two of you. When you both started talking, you would get very upset at how your views were dismissed when you were in AA meetings and the disdain you felt. And yet the two of you were sort of laughing and saying, I don't know what the AA way of life is.
Okay.
And I found that hard to believe, but it ringed of the disdain that you two hated so much.
Oh, no.
It didn't sound supportive of what AA does bring with all of its flaws. Don't get me wrong.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, I'm not, believe me, I'm not anti-AA at all. I think John might come across that way, but I totally am not.
Well, I know he's more militant against it.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. But I'm not.
And that's changed over the years.
Yeah, I'm also though not as involved with it as I used to be too, and I've kind of grown in other directions. So I'm more interested in other avenues of recovery, but I've not dismissed AA. I could still go to AA meetings and so forth, but I need to watch it because I never want to come across as someone who dismisses AA as an option because, I went to meetings for 30 some years and I got sober there as a young person in traditional AA. And I still have a lot of respect for the steps and so forth. But anyway, enough said about that.
Well, I think it's important because we need to look at, as a secular person, what is it that AA keeps drawing to people? Because as your speaker last week, actually it's 2 weeks ago, said in Rational Recovery, people go to AA meetings and do the two.
That's right.
And, if you look at some of the group therapy people, I can't remember his name, Yoakum somebody, who started them back in the 80s, he said that AAs didn't do well not AAs, alcoholics didn't do well in group therapy unless they were with other alcoholics. They didn't meld well. And I think as a recovery person, I need to think about why is that and what is it that people find attractive in AA.
What do you think that is?
I think what it is, and I think that what we're missing in the secular programs is in the secular and rational recovery and sober laying, some of those others, it's a self-help attitude.
Right.
And in my view, AA is not self-help. It's helping others. And to me, that's a so-called AA way of life, the thought of reaching out. And I know as an alcoholic, I am an absolutely selfish person. I mean, if I told somebody my father was getting chemotherapy, I wouldn't be thinking about my father getting chemotherapy. I would be thinking, oh gosh, that's such an imposition in my life. That's so hard for me to deal with. And that's my natural mindset, I think, as an alcoholic. That self-centeredness. And, I come into everything sort of, oh, there's a traffic jam. How's that interfering with my life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I think of a spiritual person, I think that they would go, gosh, I wonder if somebody's hurt first, and not, gosh, this is interfering with me.
Right. Right.
Or when they see a situation, to me, the spiritual person thinks the positive first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas I often think the negative first.
Mm.
And it takes the same amount of thought.
Right. Either way.
Right. And, to me, that's what AA brought out of me that other programs didn't. Thinking of somebody else first.
Okay.
What can I bring to this meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Who can I help at this meeting? A lot of secular meetings I've gone to, I don't hear anything about sponsorship.
That's right.
I don't hear anything about reaching out to the person who's new there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see people taking other people's phone numbers. And that's part of the reason I think we haven't spread that well.
Okay.
We're missing that aspect that AA brings.
Mm-hmm. The sponsorship aspect of it. The
helping the newcomer.
Right.
The realizing with 30 days, I can help somebody with 15 days.
Mm-hmm.
And not the, I'm here to dump my problems, have you listen to them, go poor you, and then we leave the meeting and I don't hear from anyone.
Is that true for the in-person meetings as well as the Zoom meetings, or is it just the Zoom meetings that you notice that more than the...
I noticed it at the in-person, but I only went to ones right in Philadelphia and Malvern.
Okay.
So there's not, unfortunately, I tried to start one in Bucks County, but I've been unsuccessful.
Yeah. Because I noticed, and every group is going to be different too, but I've noticed like at our group here, there wasn't like a formal, program of sponsorship or anything. It wasn't like we were announcing at meetings, I will be a sponsor, anything like that, although we did try that for a little while. And people weren't talking a lot about their sponsors, but people did have sponsors and people did have others that would help them through the steps. And there was a sense in the group that that people were there mutually to support one another. And I think my position that I kind of developed over a long period of time is that I'm a better friend and one to share my experience than I am with being like an authority type figure that is there to really, I just think that if someone comes to me and they want me to be their sponsor, I would just say, well, what do you want? What do you want from AA? What are your goals for sobriety? And maybe we can talk and see how you do to get through there. But there seems to be a culture that has kind of developed around sponsorship that makes it something other than that. It kind of moved away, in my opinion, from the Bill and Bob model where they were really equals in a friendship to a different type of a relationship where my sponsor tells me, or that type of thing. And that's the part that makes me uncomfortable, is if a sponsorship relationship moves from one of peers to one of having, I don't know, some sort of sway over the newcomer. Yeah. And that's what my concern is. And it's not like, I don't think that is as big a deal as it could be. I mean, I think for the most part that sponsorship does work out pretty well, that the people are genuinely concerned about each other and they're not taking advantage of the new person or anything like that. I think for the most part they're healthy relationships, but I think there's a danger of it maybe not being, and that's where I have the caution, I think. Yeah.
I think that's, very accurate point. I mean, I have to agree with you. I mean, to me, sponsorship is me sharing my experience and strength, basically, and hope. And if I'm sharing mine, it can't be wrong. If I'm telling you what I think a book says or what I think you ought to do, then yeah, I think that's a danger. It's not what I should be doing.
Right. Right.
Even as a sponsor, I don't. And I think, I guess to me, the most successful sponsorship relationships have been the ones in which I pulled people into service, frankly.
Oh.
To me, that is probably the biggest thing that I feel is important for a sponsor, actually, is to get somebody involved and out of themselves.
Service being could be like speaking
Picking up the
somewhere.
chairs, speaking somewhere, making the coffee, cleaning up afterwards. When I first came in, it was washing ashtrays and coffee cups.
Right.
I didn't smoke. I didn't drink coffee. But I still did it, and
I remember the days of cleaning ashtrays. That we don't have that problem anymore, do we?
No, just as well. I can't think because I was in smoke-filled rooms too much.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean,
there's no question. But I'm so passionate about this because I think of the people that die because there's just people talking God at an AA meeting.
And it does turn a lot of people off, for sure.
God, yeah, it turned me off. I wasn't an opinionated.
I know, but you said you managed through it from the beginning, though, didn't you?
Because I lucked out, and a woman who would say she was a spiritual person but was not Christian and said that at meetings, asked me to drive her. She was heavily involved in an area delegate, and then the state delegate, to drive her places. And I thought she was very, very old. She was probably 60. And she needed somebody to help drive her all those far distances. I didn't know I was being dragged in. But going to many conventions and assemblies, I was like, what am I learning the traditions for? This is so stupid. It gave me a way to learn to deal with people. I didn't know how to deal with people. I started drinking young. I started using men young. I didn't know how to have a relationship with anybody. I didn't understand give and take. I didn't realize if you were a friend to somebody, you thought about if they went to the doctor, you should ask them, how did it go? I was just concerned with me surviving and me getting by. No thought about you unless you could supply me with drugs or alcohol. That was your only use.
See, I had that same experience because I also started young, got sober young, and the best thing that AA did for me at that time when I got into the program, I was lucky that I found myself in a group of other guys my age. We were all in our 20s, early 30s, and we were getting sober together. And it was the first time really in my life where I had friendships that were, I guess, a deeper level of friendship than I had ever before and previously in my life.
Because you weren't looking for what they could give you?
I guess so. Yeah. We were helping each other.
Yeah. But you weren't, you were doing it on you were helping each other. That's what you were there to do, help each other.
Yeah.
That wasn't,
we had a genuine concern for each other's welfare.
Right. For the first time, you probably weren't being self-centered.
That's right. That's right. And as you said, during that drinking period, especially when I had all the problems, all I could do was focus on getting out of whatever mess I was in, lying my way out of it, doing something to get out of whatever, thinking on my feet, get out of these situations. And that's all I could do. So yeah, it's like addiction and alcoholism. It just kind of helps. It makes it that self-centeredness is a way of coping with whatever the craziness is that we've got going on around us. And then when that stops, when the craziness stops, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by people who have also stopped that craziness, and then now we're sitting there trying to cope with it and understand it and help each other. Boy, what a big difference that makes. And it takes a while to grow out of that mindset, though, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. I think probably decades, at least for some of us.
Yeah. Well, it did me. For sure.
It's still, sometimes I've got to fight through I don't really want to call and find out about that today. Attitude to go, yes, that's what, if you care about somebody, that is what I should do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm usually glad when I've done it, but I still will have to talk myself sometimes into it. But I guess that's what I find missing from the other programs and a lot of the secular.
Mm-hmm.
There's not that sort of camaraderie. There's not that, how can we do this together?
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think that one of the for me, and my only experience with secular AA meetings is here in my
right.
hometown here in Kansas City, and that's a pretty close knit group. And I saw people going out doing things together and having relationships outside the meeting, and people sponsoring. I saw all that stuff,
Yeah.
and I thought it was very healthy. The online meetings, I'm not really crazy about them anyway. I didn't see a whole lot of that going on really.
Yeah.
I don't know how, and maybe that's one of the shortcomings of an online meeting.
I
Um,
get, I understand what you're saying, because I do see that in pretty much every meeting except my home meeting, which is now back to being hybrid.
mm-hmm.
But for some reason, we've been able to do more of that interplay there. Last week we had a meeting in which somebody had first day 15 days, and we had some people 30 days and 40 days who were reaching out and talking to them, and helping them go through what
Mm-hmm.
it's like to be overwhelmed with emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and making arrangements to follow up with them after the meeting. I guess it's worked in some. I mean, we've had some people who got sober during this pandemic.
Yeah.
It's a 6 a.m. meeting, and I happen to think at 6 a.m. people haven't had a chance to put on their masks, so they're probably a little bit more
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
at a
That's a good
meeting at
point.
6 a.m., you're desperate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
But
do you make an effort now to sponsor people?
yeah,
How do you go about doing that? Is it more of
I
a
guess
formal relationship, or is it kind of something that just happens as naturally?
it happens, I guess, two ways. Sometimes people will say, "Why don't you ask Anne to be your sponsor?" Sometimes it happens to be somebody. My sponsor taught me taking somebody's number who's new in the rooms is foolish. That's thinking, it's expecting a well act out of a sick person. You take their number, you call them.
That's
Um,
interesting. That's
yeah.
an interesting take.
Oh,
Um,
well, that was, yeah. I came to my first meeting. All these people gave me one of their numbers, and I'm like,
oh,
"Fuck,
I
I'm gonna
wouldn't
call
call.
you.
No,
You're an alcoholic. You're in
yeah,
trouble. I'm not
yeah,
calling you. What are you, nuts?"
yeah.
I
That's
didn't
a good
call anybody.
point. No, I didn't either. No, not until I had been around for a while and got to
Yeah,
know people. Yeah.
I you know I was no, I was getting ready. Somebody could tell that I was ready to stop doing this, and he said, "Look, can I give your number to somebody who lives in the same area you do?" And she called me up, asked if you want to go out for dinner. I offered to pay for her dinner because she was, I said, a little old lady. And she said, "No, AA, can't accept money. It's
Mm-hmm.
non-professional." I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Lady, I'm just trying to be nice." But, as I said, she started taking me around. In about 9 months, I asked her to be my sponsor. And she said, "What do you think I've been doing?"
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I didn't know. Um, so sometimes I get to it formally.
Yeah.
Frankly, most of the people I sponsor end up being finding God, but there you are.
Really?
Yes, it's very annoying because I'm a rather outspoken.
Uh-huh.
I've gotten more outspoken over the years than I was
Really?
originally.
Well, that's interesting. And how's that received?
Tolerantly most of the
Uh-huh.
time,
Uh-huh.
because at this point they've all heard me on the subject probably enough. The first time I say, "Well, you sit quietly and you listen, and you see how many people mention the word God when they share.
Mm,
And then you think about how you would be if you were in that meeting not believing in God, and every single person said, 'My higher power. I'm
right.
grateful to God, AA and my higher power.'" How would you feel if you were there and you couldn't find that?
Mm-hmm.
And then when people sit there and say, "Oh, there are all these musts in the big book. You must do this or you will drink." Um, point out that if somebody comes in who is drunk, they don't give them lectures on how they're not following things. But if people talk about how they haven't found God, we all know the number of people who walk up to you. I remember the first person said, "You're cursing the very God that's going to save you."
Oh, God.
And I'm like, well, that's good. I hope he's bigger than that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
most people aren't that willing to talk back.
Right.
Which means they leave, which means they have a great chance of dying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that makes me do it.
Right.
Because if nobody's there to say, you don't have to believe, and please try and remember that the person who lived the longest of the early first 35 was the atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy B.
That's right.
Outlived Bob, Bill,
Isn't that
all
funny?
of
That's
the
true.
others.
Yep.
He even outlived Earl Treat, who was 35 when he came in,
Mm-hmm.
who should have lived the longest. So
Mm-hmm.
if AA required you to believe in God, Jimmy B wouldn't have made it to 1989.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's weird.
So
I
it
got
can't be true.
No. You just reminded me of a strange YouTube comment that I got. It's not even worth mentioning, but I will. What the hell? But the guy, he pointed out that that the whole purpose of an AA group is to use God to get sober, and that if we don't believe in God, then we're selfish and we can't follow the traditions, blah blah blah. And anyway, I responded to him. I said, well, I'm sure glad that AA isn't a religious program and that every group can do whatever it wants to do.
Yes.
So, which really is the truth. It's not a religious
is,
program.
It is the truth.
Yeah.
And, people say, well, how do you do it? Don't you have a higher power? I'm like, no, I don't have a higher power. I
Right.
believe that there's a power in us, in the program. It's not higher.
Right.
It's equal.
Yeah.
It's me reaching out. To me, it's me reaching out and saying, I can't do this by myself. I need help, even if it's just your input to listen. I need a collective thought on it.
Mm-hmm.
I need to care what happens to the rest of humanity. That's not a higher power, but it's a belief in the power of us all. And to me, that's all that the steps and the traditions require. We listen to a group conscience. Well,
Yeah.
to me, that's not necessarily God speaking, especially some of the business meetings I've been at.
And I did point out to this guy that tradition says God may express himself, but
Yeah.
it may not too. And if God doesn't express himself, then the group just has to do its best, right?
Right. One of the reason our group now votes on something, then waits a month and votes on it again.
Right.
Very often they rethink it after the experience of the business meeting when you can reflect.
The way that you describe the steps is exactly how I see them. And I think for me, it was something that happened over a long period of time. My view and thoughts and relationship with the steps has evolved and changed dramatically over a period of time. But I've really come to see it as a description of a process, and as you said, it's, I have a problem. I need help. I'm going to go get the help.
Or I'm going to open up to help.
Open up to help. Open up the idea that I could be helped or whatever. Yeah, but
right.
it's just
may or may not come.
Right. But I think people get stuck on the language sometimes.
Oh, I mean, rational recovery talks about how it's science-based. To me, AA is science-based. If you drop the God part out of it.
Right.
I mean, there's not really a whole lot different in the rational recovery method of dealing with things than there is in the AA. It's come to a group, share a problem, think about the consequences of it, think about the why you're doing it, and, talking about it, finding that out.
I know. What's interesting, Anne, is because I've been around AA for so long, and because the steps were so important to me for so long, I can go to any program, whether it be Smart Recovery, Dharma Recovery, Life Ring. I can look at the process that people go through and the recovery process, the program that they have, the interaction they have with each other, and I can see all kinds of similarities to
Right.
AA and the steps. But when I mention that, my hands get slapped. It's like, how dare you compare AA to this? You know, this stands on its own. This is its own thing. But I think that there's a commonality in
Yeah.
recovery, that there's a process that's really a human process that's individual to each of us and how we describe it. But any one of these different programs you go to, I can plug steps into almost any of these things,
And traditions.
and traditions too. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I learned to use the traditions on how to adjust. I need to be self-supporting. I'm
That was
autonomous
a big one.
unless I harm others. Everybody has a right to its own, their own process, their own mistakes, unless they're going to hurt me. To me, that's all part of that process I need to learn, that I don't need to fix people. And there's where I think you're right when you're talking about sponsorship. It's not my job to fix the person I'm
Right.
sponsoring.
Right.
You
Right.
know, their path is their path.
Right. Now you
Um,
were lucky when you were new to the program, because you did have a sponsor who did let you find your own way, that did respect
yes.
your path. I didn't have that, but I was still at that point in my life, I was different than you in that I was more malleable. I guess I would just I wouldn't. I didn't know what I believed. I just said, I'll do whatever, I'll say whatever I think I have to say. But yeah, I definitely had people telling me things that I needed to do, you
Yeah.
know.
And I had people try and do that too, other than my sponsor, Bonnie. I mean, the number of people who came up and said, well, why don't you just try it? And I tried. For some reason, I believe that there's going to come a point in your sobriety where the only thing standing between you and a drink is a God.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why I believe that statement, but I did. And so I struggled to try and find a God and do the prayer stuff and do the meditation and, turn it over to God and let it go. And, I had a very, very serious car accident at 9 months in which, my passenger died after a while as a result of his
Oh,
injuries. And I remember laying there saying, well, if there's a God and I'm dying, can you do me a favor and just let me know it now? As that was the most important thing in my life at that moment, was to know if
mm-hmm.
this God thing was for real. And I didn't get any enlightenment. I finished the steps. I didn't get any enlightenment. I did the fifth step. I didn't get it, didn't feel any closer to a God. I prayed to have these defects of character removed, and they stuck around.
Right.
Um, all
As they
convinced me,
do.
frankly, that nope, sorry, it's not a God for me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've had people come up and tell me I must do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to be happy if I don't do this.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Yep.
you shouldn't share because you shouldn't speak because you're going to tell people that they don't have to have a God, and that's not what the AA program says. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll let you speak for me if you're not going to say this,
Mm-hmm.
and then don't ask me to speak.
Yep.
But I watch people go and leave rooms when people say stuff like that. Um, and yeah, that's the shame. I mean, well, big thing at our last meeting was changing the damn preamble to say, a fellowship of people
Right.
rather than men and women,
Right.
as if this was critical and as if that wasn't improved change back. Look at the copyright, 1987, people.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, I'll speak at business meetings about that's what's going to doom AA. It's
Mm.
inability to change.
Right.
And I understand John wanting to give up on it because it's so damn difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I no longer get shunned for not even saying the Lord's Prayer.
Right.
People sometimes get annoyed when I chair meetings and I ask someone else to do the Lord's Prayer. So and so will now lead you in the Lord's Prayer. Do you need to make it so obvious? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I do,
So,
actually.
and do you think it's important for someone like you or even me, who is sober, an atheist or a secular person, however you want to describe it? Do you think it's important for those to go to a traditional AA meeting?
Yes,
You do? Okay.
I
All
do.
right. There are others that feel that way too.
Because people die if we're not there.
Right. Right.
I mean, it'd be nice to say there are other things out there, but I mean, you've clearly gone to rational recovery meetings.
Mm-hmm.
What what do they look like to you? They're usually 35-year-old middle-class white males, the ones I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Just I don't see too many women. I don't see desperate cases there. I mean, who
Yeah.
makes it to AA? The people who have given up on everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Who thought coming to recovery was the worst thing that could happen in their life,
Right.
or they're court ordered there, or spouse ordered there.
Right.
People go to rational recovery because they want help.
Right.
They go to smart recovery because they want help. It's all behavior-based therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and you're there because you want help. What are
Right.
most people at AA there? Because they've got no other choice.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the last place you're thinking of, you're forced to go, and you go and you get there, and it says you have to believe in God, where are you left with?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
Boy.
Except the
See,
streets.
I hear what you're saying. I stopped going to traditional AA meetings when I started our secular AA group here in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And I was harassed. I'm sorry, but I had a guy stare me down like I was an evil person just because I wasn't reciting the Lord's Prayer. And I
Oh,
was
yeah.
standing there respectfully and quietly.
Yep.
I was made to feel so uncomfortable at those meetings that if I hadn't started a secular AA meeting, I couldn't go. I mean, I have had some really bad experiences. So it would be really difficult for me to sit through a traditional AA meeting for the sole purpose of just being there to help someone not have to go through that. You know what I'm saying? It's just really, really, really hard.
Absolutely. There's a clubhouse, and I feel really bad because my sponsor was one of the original founders of this clubhouse. It's called the 12 Keys. And she couldn't go. Oh, well,
She likes to visit. This is
well,
Luna.
here you go.
Luna. Oh,
This is
Luna, look at
Biscuit.
that. Oh, Biscuit. I may have met Biscuit before.
You have.
I think so.
You have. But I couldn't go there because they were one of those places who, one, they didn't like you to curse, and they had it up the rule on the wall. It was guaranteed that I was going to say fuck every third word. You were only allowed to identify yourself as an alcoholic, and I always say I'm an alcoholic and I'm an addict.
Uh-huh. Oh, you were breaking all the rules.
Oh, yeah. And I would point out to them that they can't stop me from being at the meeting. They can ask me to leave the clubhouse after the meeting's over, and I will.
Okay.
But yeah, there's some meetings I didn't go to because it was more pain. And if I couldn't talk about it, anybody there was going to be too scared anyway.
Right.
So I would try and work on meetings that were a little bit more open to hearing
that's a good point. And there's a lot of those too. I can even think of my own city too, for example. There are some groups that are not as militant as others. Right. And the group that I used to go to before I started the secular meeting here, it was an all men's group, and it was a rough and tumble kind of a place, and people didn't have a problem, telling you what to do, so that's just the way that was my experience, but then there's another group here that's more genteel,
but it's a mixture. I mean, I did need people to say, look, just try this. Stop arguing and try it. If it doesn't work, fine.
Yeah.
But stop arguing with us and try it.
Right.
My sponsor tricked me into it. I mean, she suggested I read a chapter at a time and tell her what was wrong with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go.
She got me, of course, to carefully reading the chapter.
Right.
And then, of course, laughing hysterically whenever we read the chapter on we agnostics, which is the most bullshit chapter in the book.
Right.
Next to the wives.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's a toss up there, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I can feel for Jim Burwell, who never could come out really and say that he was an atheist,
Mm-hmm.
who had to find ways around describing what he was,
Yeah. Yeah.
and probably how he felt the way they wrote his story, making it sound like he found something in a room.
Oh, I know. Isn't that
Right.
sad?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Although that was
You
a
know.
long time ago too, and the culture in the United States was just that way. I
And
mean, you couldn't be an
yes.
atheist, that was
No,
bad.
that was akin to being a communist.
Right, it
Bec
was.
right. You know, but, that was then, and you'd like to think I do find the more I have shared not believing in a God or a higher power, the more other people have started doing it. It takes a
Yeah,
while. It seems to take a while when I'm at a meeting for the other people to see I haven't been driven out.
right,
And it's a shame. There's no question. It's a shame that it's just not more open,
right.
and that people in the program, it's when you point out to them that, why are you so scared of my non-belief, as opposed to, you're not that scared when somebody comes in who's gone out.
Yeah.
You have no problem with their failure to grasp all the things that you want. So why the problem with me?
I think it's a shame that it's even an issue to begin with. And
Mhm.
this is where I th- I think it would be wise, but you're not going to change this culture. You're not going to change the culture, I don't believe,
I
but
think
because of the origins of the steps and the way they are originally written, people will take them literally instead of looking at the underlying actions, in within them, which
it
are
is,
universal and work well. It's
especially the first 6 steps, when they were the way they're first written, barely mention God at all.
oh, that's
When they
right. The
steps
very
instead of
original
12.
ones.
Right, the
Mm-hmm.
very original ones,
Yep. And
you know?
again, they were describing a process, and it
Right,
was really a nebulous type of a thing. It wasn't like formally written down or anything, but these are in
right,
general the things that we do. We say we have a problem, we ask for help, we get honest, we help other people.
right,
you know and it
right,
was a process, and then all of a sudden they decided to put it in a book and make flowery language around it, and that over time, people start looking at them more narrowly as these are the specific things you need
right,
to do. See, it says God here, God there, God there.
and
So
says must, must, must,
must,
must.
must, 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 and all that kind of stuff. But
Right,
yeah, the origins of it was just like, this is a process we went through. This is what happened to us. This is what we did. And they were religious at the time, so I guess they put it in that language. That was okay. But it's okay. It's also perfectly okay for someone like me and you to say, well, yeah, I had the same experience, but this is the way I would describe it.
and as we both know, Bill had his own problems with what was a spiritual awakening. He
Mm,
tried the psychedelics, he tried
right,
LSD,
he did.
hoping
Hmm.
that that would get people. He sent Jimmy Burwell and some others into the Mideast to study different religions, hoping that could open the door. He dealt with the Buddhists and allowed them to change the steps to good instead of God. He wanted a bigger
Yeah,
door, a bigger gateway.
yeah, yeah.
You can read in his writings that he was worried we were killing people because we were being so rigid,
Yes. Yep. He sure
you
did.
know.
He sure
And
did.
sometimes I'll use, some of his writings to point out to people.
Mm-hmm.
No, the big books that was written when these people had 3 years sobriety, people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of them, Earl Treat, 60 days when he wrote his story.
Yeah.
Are we really expecting all the answers to be in people that new in sobriety when we think about how much we've changed?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I know. And I know. And I do also pick up on that stuff about Bill Wilson too. It's like people always the hardcore traditionalists, I guess if you want to call them that, they're going to remember Bill Wilson from 1939 and not the Bill
Right,
Wilson from 1968, you know?
right.
It's so after he'd been sober for a long time. So
Yeah,
that's just kind of, but no, I hear where you're coming from. There are a lot of people out there who believe that, well, first of all, AA is the biggest game in town for sure. It's the most accessible
right.
mutual aid support group anywhere. and in history. It's just huge. And they're easy to get to the meetings. When you get to a meeting, it's easy to feel, to participate, get involved. I mean, you don't have to do anything really, just to go, just show up, and so it's very accessible, and you can start AA meetings so easily too. So there's a lot of benefit to having Alcoholics Anonymous out there, because as you said in the beginning, the most critical thing I think for anyone in recovery is having that support, that community, that support of people. And AA does provide that. You have Smart Recovery, you have Life Ring, you have Women for Sobriety, but they don't have near the presence that AA has. So it's nice that you have that option.
Right.
And I see your point of, being a voice of reason, I guess you could say, in meetings where reason might not exist. If you're in a meeting where people are pounding the book and God, 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 you can say, or no God.
Yeah. The number I've said, and now on the other hand.
You're right. And in all fairness, there are some good people out there. Even in my old group, I got to the point when I came out as an atheist towards the end, when they would read how it works at the beginning of the meeting, they said that there'd be that line, "There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now." And I'd always pipe up, "Or not."
I cause all sorts of trouble because I refuse to use he and him.
Yeah, that's
another. You find God now,
right?
Not why you find him now.
Yeah. There is one who has all power. That one is God.
Yeah,
or not.
Or not. Yeah.
So.
I on occasion have been really bad and have read how it works from the secular view.
Yeah.
The funny thing is when people don't actually notice that I've done it.
That would be interesting.
You'd be surprised because they're not necessarily listening that closely because I hear it so often.
Oh my gosh, you are so right. That's that is so true. So for like 25 freaking years, I'd go to meetings where they'd be reading that thing, and it never bothered me because it got to be like almost meditative. I hear the cadence of the words. I'm sitting there, I'm having my coffee, I'm doing fine. The meeting's getting ready to start. It never bothered me until I realized I was an atheist and I started listening to the words. And then all of a sudden I'm squirming in my seats, but you're right. Most people don't actually pay attention. They're just kind of zoning out at that point. This is the formality of opening the meeting, basically.
The only time they notice it is when I do the serenity prayer. Because when you go, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can. If you don't say the God, they don't have a chance to chime in.
Oh, right. God.
It throws them off.
God.
Everybody's waiting for you to go, God, and then everybody can jump in, grant. But when you start with grant, it tongue ties them. They just can't jump in then.
So in your area, do
their cadence off?
Yeah. In your area, do they close with the Lord's Prayer?
Oh, Lord, they do. Yes.
They do. Yeah.
Yeah. Some meetings not, but the great majority still do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I same here, although I haven't been to a traditional meeting in a long time.
Often don't, but most of the co-ed ones do.
I think there have been a few around here that have decided to stop doing that and close with like the responsibility statement or something like that. But I think by and large, most of them do close with the Lord's Prayer. Yeah. That's another show all in itself right there.
It is. It's a real problem.
It is.
Only stuff, when I have sponsored Jewish people, I show them their version of the Lord's Prayer that the Christians all copied from, but
Oh, that's one I don't even know about. So.
Yeah, it's really, think about it. A mass is not far off.
No.
From what you would see at a synagogue, except you just don't have the New Testament. I mean, we borrowed heavily.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So, interesting. Did we resolve anything here? Did we put across the point here of what you wanted to say about the importance of, being a voice?
For those who are willing to do it, I agree. There are some meetings in which it's just, you
Yeah.
leave feeling like you're scarred and beaten up.
Yeah.
And I'll occasionally go back to them just so people know that there's somebody out there in case they
Right.
fall across somebody. But
in all fairness, those meetings are the minority. Most meetings are a little more genteel. They might be religious and stuff, talk about God, 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 but they're not going to pounce on you really
quite so
necessarily.
strongly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
For the most part. I mean,
yeah.
a lot of times they'll roll their eyes when I speak,
You
but
get the rolled eyes.
luckily I have the personality that it just doesn't bother me anymore.
Right,
Because as I said, I'm too worried about people who don't come back after not knowing you cannot believe.
right,
We have a
right.
few people now in my home group that have only been able to stay there because even though they've, as I said, they all found God in the end, but it gave them the years to stay not believing and not thinking that they were at fault or that there was something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how didn't it, I know for me, for a while I felt like I must be doing this program wrong because I haven't found God.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I got more into the history of AA, especially back to, the Quad A groups in the 1970s to realize that atheism has been in AA since its beginning. It
Right,
just wasn't talked about.
right.
Now at least, thank God for the internet, you can find it and know that you're
Mm-hmm.
not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seems to be
Thank
a lot
goodness
of
for
us.
right, Toronto fighting, AA to say, yes, you can be part of AA and be secular.
Mm-hmm.
We were lucky in Philadelphia because, frankly, the person who ran the website happened to be secular.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so nobody noticed that he was including secular AA meetings
yeah.
in the meeting
And
list.
in Kansas City, we didn't have any problems getting listed at all whatsoever. So it's
But I do
funny.
know places that did. So,
Yeah, me too. Me too.
you know,
And it was weird because there's no rhyme or reason to it. Some
no.
city that you might think would be totally open to it isn't. Another city that you think we're a bunch of rednecks, we're just totally fine with it. So,
Well, I have to say, I like traveling, and my travels in the South, I got less grief being an
really
atheist in the South than I did in the North, and I far
interesting.
more expected it down there.
Yep. Yeah.
But what I realized at a lot of meetings down there, they weren't as serious about only saying you're at AA. There were a lot of addicts at a lot of the meeting
Mm.
because it was such a problem. The
Mm.
opioid
Right.
epidemic changed their whole attitude
Interesting.
towards that. And
Interesting.
that loosening to allowing people to say that they were an addict at an AA meeting
Yep.
seemed to lessen their insistence on you believing in God and having a meeting.
And one little comment about that before we sign off, but this could also be another episode. And I remember when I got sober in '88, and I know you came in '86. And at that time when I was in, I heard a lot of people say they were addict, alcoholic, or different things, and it was never a big deal. All of a sudden, it
Yeah.
became a big deal later. I don't that
Not that much later, no.
no
Because it was just starting then. It was that whole singleness of purpose that
right.
started kicking in, and a whole group. Because I remember, because as I said, my sponsor was big into service, and it became this whole thing that if AA lets addicts in, then NA won't be able to grow strong. And
Okay.
somehow or other, we were doing them a favor by keeping them out.
Uh huh.
And, I've always sort of said, well, you better rewrite your goddamn stories.
Right.
Don't
Right.
read acceptance is the answer
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's more about drugs than any story in there.
And I'd
Build
always
box
go back. The
don't
only
use drugs.
requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Then
Yep.
that means if you have a desire to stop drinking, regardless of whatever problem you
Else you
have,
have. But
that has
but
always kind of thrown me.
absolutely, it's thrown me in the meetings where you say you can't mention drugs. It's like you haven't been reading the stories in the big book, have you?
Right. Yeah. Dr. Bob, for example.
Dr. Bob, Bill as well.
Yeah. Bill too. Yep.
And
Yep.
our physician, he
Yep.
speaks more about drugs.
Yep. Yep.
I think it's now called Acceptance is the Answer. They changed the name of it,
They
but
did change the name. Yeah.
Right.
It
But I
used to be
mean,
Dr. Alcoholic Admin. They changed the name.
that's it. Yep.
They don't like that addict word.
Exactly. But I
Yeah.
mean, you read that story or you listen to him talk. I
Yeah.
mean, there's recorded talks by him.
Yeah.
He talks heavily about his drug issue.
Yep.
And he talked openly about thinking that addicts ought to be openly accepted in AA.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, you
As they
know?
should, I think, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Well,
it's foolish not to.
yeah.
But anyway,
And
thank
thank
you for
you.
tolerating me.
Oh, I loved this. Thank you. Thank you so much for the feedback on the episode with John, and also for listening all these years and for reaching out to me after listening to Ibby. And, I sometimes will say before I speak someplace that whatever I say today, I could totally change my mind a month from now or a year from now. I'm always going to be a work in progress. So,
Oh, yeah.
and that's what makes it fun for me. It makes it interesting, keeps life interesting. So,
That's why I
nice
keep
to see you.
listening to you.
Aw.
I learned so much.
That's nice of you. So thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.